In this tutorial, I will demonstrate how you can add additional operating systems to your existing MDT boot image. If you haven't watched my previously posted comprehensive tutorial on how to set up your MDT, please check the link in the description of this video or click on the card on the top right hand corner. The first thing we need to do before we go any further is to find a Windows operating system that we would like to add to our MDT share. There are a couple of ways you can do this. You can download it from a bootable USB drive, DVD, CD drive, or you can download it from the Microsoft website. So I chose the downloading from the Microsoft website option, and I have the ISO image in my downloads folder on my Windows server. So I decided to go with the Windows 10 multi-edition. That is the ISO file that contains more than one operating system. In other words, it has Windows 10 Professional, Windows 10 Home, Windows 10 Education, etc., etc. But if you choose to select an ISO file that has only one operating system, you can go through the same process here as well. When you have downloaded the ISO file, you can just use this ISO file to add it to your boot image for your MDT. You have to mount it because otherwise the MDT Workbench won't be able to extract the files that it needs. I'll explain this in a few minutes. So let's go and open our Microsoft Deployment Toolkit Deployment Workbench console. So I'm going to Start menu under Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. I'm going to launch the Deployment Workbench. And in here, we have our deployment shares we created. Remember, on my previous tutorial, we have created this deployment share. And if I expand that menu options from the left-hand side, I have applications, operating systems, out-of-the-box drivers, packages, task sequences, advanced configuration, and monitoring. Today, what we are interested in is the operating systems and task sequences, and I will explain why those two are important here. So under the operating systems, you see that we have the Windows 11 Enterprise Evaluation Edition added right here, which we have done in my previous tutorial. Again, if you haven't watched that, please go ahead and watch that. That will give you a comprehensive tutorial on how to create MDT shares. So I have already created the MDT share. I just want to add a new operating system here. In this situation, in this particular situation, I'm adding multiple operating systems containing within this one single ISO file, which are different flavors or editions of Windows 10, because it's the multi-edition ISO. Now, if I don't mount this ISO, what's going to happen when you go to your deployment workbench, when you select your operating system section, and if you right click, and you need to select import operating system, because that's how you can import an operating system into your deployment share. It'll give you three options: full set of source files, custom image, also known as WIM file, Windows deployment services images. And because it is coming from an ISO file, and for most of the viewers here, it will be from an ISO file, we will select the full set of source files, which is the description right here. It's coming from a Windows DVD, CD, or equivalent. In the other word, it is an ISO file. And when you click next, and when you select the source directory, when you select this download folder, it will come back with an error because it cannot see the files contained within this without mounting it. I will show you what I mean by that. So I go browse here. And if I go into this PC, and if I go to downloads, and in here, if I click OK and go next, please fix all errors before continuing. If I click OK, and if I hover over this icon, it says the source directory specified does not contain an identifiable operating system contained within them. So you may ask, why is that? Because the reason for that is, even though this ISO file is in here under the download section of this PC, because it's not mounted, the deployment workbench cannot see the source files. So what do we need to do? We need to right click and mount it. And once you mount it, it should be on your CD or DVD drive. So right now it's mounted in the F drive right here for me. So now if I go back to my deployment workbench and if I click browse here under the import operating system wizard, which we selected, I'll go over again just in case you missed that. Basically right here, you select the operating systems, right click, import operating systems, full set of source files. Under here, we're going to select browse, but now we're going to select that DVD F drive. See, you see the boot, EFI, sources, support, all the folders that needed for adding onto this, we have it under the F drive. You don't need all of them, but you need some of them. It will automatically select what it needs, and we're going to just select the F drive, click OK, and click next. Basically, you need to be have a way that it is mounted. So now it's going to ask, what should the destination directory name be named? So I'm going to call it just Windows 10 x64 because this file contain multiple editions. I'm going to click next. And it gives you a brief summary of what's going to happen. It has a source files and we're going to put it into destination file Windows 10 x64. That's going to be the folder and it's coming from the F drive. Looks good, and click next. And it's going to go ahead and try to create those files or copy those files. So you should get a success message after the execution has been completed. There you go. It says the process completed successfully and import is finished, and we're going to click finish and it'll populate all the Windows operating systems files available within that ISO file that we have mounted right here. So as you can see, it is the multi-Windows operating system edition. Because of that, instead of just uploading one in here, it uploaded multiple operating systems available in that ISO file, in other words WIM files. Now let's say you don't want some of these files to be used on your MDT. You have two options to remove them. One is simply selecting the file. For example, let's say I don't want the Windows 10 home home N edition or network edition. I can select that and I can simply click delete, and it will give you the option to delete that. And you can also select completely delete these items even if there are copies in other folders. Then in other words, it's a forced delete. And don't worry about that. As long as you only have selected one file and it's showing off one file, it's not going to delete anything else, only going to delete that one particular operating system from that your multi operating system ISO. So because I'm using the multi operating system multi-flavored Windows 10 ISO, let's say I don't want this, I'm going to select that file, click delete right here, and I'm going to select completely delete everything and click next, and there you go, and it's gone from here. Now the other option is you can simply not give the end user the option to install all of these operating systems on the MDT side. So you can still keep the operating systems here in your operating system section of your MDT, but on the MDT GUI on the other side, on the client side, you can just simply not add these things to your MDT. How do you do that? So the way that MDT works, even though you have added the operating systems here, you still have to give it a task sequence. If it doesn't have a task sequence, it can't do anything. So if you go to on the left hand side, the task sequence section, currently we only have one task sequence. So if I were to run MDT on the other end, on the client side, even if I done the MDT deployment share, updates here, which you need to do once you anything you update down here, you need to make sure you had to right click and update deployment share right here. If the task sequence is not there for these operating systems, the end user, the client, will not be able to select any of these operating systems to be installed on the client side. So what we need to do here to allow your clients to access these operating systems, you need to create task sequence for each one of these operating systems, so they will have that option. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's go to task sequence. So I'm going to right click on the, sorry, not here, but you're going to right click on the task sequence, from the left hand side, and I'm going to select new task sequence. And in here, it's going to ask for task sequence ID. I would like to keep the similar configurations I have for Windows 11. So I'm going to call this the Win 10, let's say Pro X64. Why am I doing this? Sorry, I can put a dash right here. Why am I doing this? I'll show you why. So if I go cancel, because on the operating systems here, we have Home Edition, Professional X64 Edition, Education Edition, etc. So I want to differentiate those. So that's why when I go to task sequence and I'm going to add, right click and add new task sequence, I'm going to name it as such. So I'm going to name the task sequence ID as Win 10 Pro X64. So it's easy for me to figure out what it is. And the task sequence name, I'm going to call it Windows 10 Pro X64. So that's the name that's going to show up here. And the task sequence comments are things that it's a comment that will show up on your MDT side, so the end user or your system administrators can see what they are selecting, to have a description of what they're saying. So like you can type whatever you like, see, so you can put whatever you like. What this is going to do is going to show up on the MDT side, on the MDT GUI, a description for your system administrator, so they know exactly what they are selecting. So let's put a helpful, useful message, right? This option will install Windows 10 Professional on this client. So you can put whatever you like. So if your organization has a certain department, for example, I could say something like, this should only be used for IT department clients or computers, or whatever you want to you want to put. So this description will show up on your MDT side. You can leave it blank, you can put whatever you like. So I'm just going to put a description here, because the other one I just have Windows 11 ENT X64 on the description task sequence comment. I'm just going to put this so we can see what happened on the other end. So I'm going to click next. Again, you have a bunch of task sequence preferences or options. So I'm going to use the template for standard client task sequence. If you're not sure what to use, for now, as a student or a new system administrator, always go with the standard client task sequence. And I'm going to click next. And here it gives me the option to select. So remember, we cannot select multiple items. Even if you hold on to shift, you won't be able to select multiple items. You have to create a task sequence for each and individual operating systems you have within your MDT deployment share. So in this case, I'm going to select the Windows 10 Professional X64, this WIM file, and I'm going to click next. Do not specify product key at this time. That's the option I'm going to select. Sorry. And then I'm going to click next here, right here. And in here, you have to give the name. So you have to give the specify, the task sequence. And that will be used for all deployment of the task sequence and unless overridden by blah, blah, blah. So you can give the full name and organization, etc. So for full name, I'm just going to put admin, but you can put whatever you like. It doesn't really matter. You just have to have a full name in here. So let's call this thing Windows let's call it Windows 10 admin. You can call it whatever you like. The organization going to be sanuja.local for me, but you can call it whatever you like. Again, it doesn't need to be sanuja.local. And the Internet Explorer page, you can put whatever you like. So for me, I'm just gonna put my sanuja.com. This is basically what it's gonna create when it's gonna be launching that operating system. And I'm gonna click next, and it's gonna ask for the local administrator password. You can choose not to include it or include it, so I'm gonna include one. So you can do either leave it blank or go to this option or include one, just like adding another operating system. Click next, has all the information here. Click next, and it's going to go ahead and execute that, and you should get a message saying the process completed successfully. And if I click finish, now we have the Windows 10 Pro x64 added to task sequence. And if we go to here, if you right click and click properties, you see what we have done here. We can actually change whatever in here as well, and you can apply changes by right clicking certain changes, not everything. And you can select you can change the other task sequences. You can add it in here, which I have gone through it briefly on my previous tutorial. But basically what we have done here, we have added another task sequence that will be applied to our MDT deployment shell. Now, again, the user, the end user, or the system administrator who's trying to install, or your IT analyst on the front line trying to install operating systems using your MDT file, now only going to see these two task sequences. They're not going to see any of the other operating system. They don't even know what ISO file is being used for in each of these task sequences. The only reason they know because I label it as such and I gave them some information about what it is. So let's say you want to, for example, you want the option for them to install the education edition as well, right? So you can go to task sequence. Let's say this is a school and this task sequence is for IT department, and I actually clearly label that. So this should only be installed on IT computers, and I want everything else, for example, teachers, principals, all the other staff to have the education edition of the operating system. Again, you go back to your task sequence. Education option is already here. It should be here, right there. So what you're going to do, you're going to right click, new task sequence, go through the same process, but this time I'm going to call it Win 10 edu x64. Notice that if I put Win 10 edu like this, simple letters, it's gonna be capital when it comes down here. And for the task sequence name, I'm gonna say Windows 10 edu x64, but this one, it'll capital simple will remain that way. And this will install Windows 10 education edition. This should be used for all the clients except for the IT group. So something like that. So this is just a notice for the end use, for your IT analyst on the front line who's using your MDT shell. Again, I'll show you what this is basically means when we look at that. So we're going to click on next. Again, I'm going to use the standard client task sequence here. Click next. Now I have to select the proper operating system that I want to be deployed with this. So I'm going to go with this one, Windows 10 Pro education in Windows 10 x64. So that's the option that I want to select, and I'm going to click next. Do not specify the key, just like before. Again, you can name the Windows user whatever you want. I'm just going to call it Windows x64 edu. You can do whatever you like. Organization going to be sanuja.local, and this is going to be https sanuja.com. Again, you can leave this as blank. You can leave it as like a blank, or you can add this, but this needs to be populated, these two. And you're going to click next. Again, you can ask for administrator password. You can create whatever the password you like, but this is the password I'm going to use. And you have to provide that password to your IT analyst. Otherwise, they can get into your MDT shares. And you're going to click next. And there you go. You have all the information that needed, including admin. The admin password is used during the MDT deployment. I misspoke a little few seconds ago. Your frontline IT analyst does not actually need that admin password. They need the admin password to access your MDT share initially, but not the actual password we are using here anyway. So everything looks good. Click next. You'll get a message saying the process completed successfully. Click finish. Now you have 3. So one is the education, one is the pro, one is ENT, enterprise for Windows 11. And I will show you what this means. Like, for example, if you go to properties, where does this thing shows up? Where does the comment shows up? I'll show you when I go into our local machine and try installing Windows using MDT. Now, we have added the operating systems. We have created task sequences for some of those operating systems so that the end user or your IT analyst can install it. But the last thing what we need to do is to update your MDT files, because if you do not update your MDT deployment share, it will not show up on the other end. So what we do need to do is select the MDT deployment share from the left hand side, right click, select update deployment share. So right click on your MDT deployment share, select update deployment share, and select one of these 2 options: the optimize the boot image updating process or completely regenerate the boot image. Now, if you are experiencing any technical issues or your MDT share is not working, please select the completely regenerate the boot image. But because I don't have any issues, I'm just simply adding an operating system, a bunch of operating systems, and creating task sequences for selected operating systems. I'm going to select optimize the boot image updating process, and I'm going to click next and next, and it'll go through the process and give you a message saying the process completed successfully. Now you can click finish, and that's done. Now your MDT boot image has been updated, but if you go to your Windows deployment services, so if you open that console, remember this is part of what we have done in our previous tutorial. Again, if you haven't watched that, please go ahead and watch it. If you expand your servers, and if you expand your server section, and if you go to boot images, you'll notice the date on that boot image, or the date and time on that boot image, is really old. So today is the August 7th, 2023, but the last time it looks like it got updated was January 8th, 2023. Hey Sanuja, is that mean what we have done here by right clicking here, updating the deployment share, didn't get ported over here? No, it is not. This is basically saying, this Lite Touch Windows PE boot image files added to this deployment was added on January. But in fact, the actual file, the Lite Touch Windows PE, has been updated with the new update that we have done today, even though this date is showing something else. So this is something that a lot of new students may not notice or get confused about. One of the things you might get confused about is, why do you need to add the task sequence? Well, if you don't add the task sequence, you won't be able to select these operating systems from your MDT files on the other end on the GUI. I'll explain that again later. But the other thing is this date. So to prove that, if I go to my Windows deployment services on the left hand side, if I right click on the boot images section and add a boot image, and if I select the file location here by clicking browse, you can see this boot image was updated on today. It got updated today. So that, in other words, that, hey, it's already updated. These boot images have been updated. These files have been updated. Not that file, but this file has been updated, and also 64-bit, because I don't use 86 anymore. That's why, if I click on it, these files has been updated. So you don't need to re-add your boot image on your Windows deployment services. It should already been updated. It just this entry was added on previous deployment share configuration. So that's why it's showing as such. So, or this previous entry got refreshed. In other words, it just got refreshed on that day. on that time. So don't worry about that. Just make sure the boot images are showing there, at least that Lite Touch one, and that this updated Lite Touch data from x64, for example, from today will be the one, x64 right here, today will be the one that it is using. In other words, what I'm telling you is that when you go to deployment, Windows Deployment Services, console, you don't need to do anything, because we have done everything under the Deployment Workbench. When you right click here and update your deployment share and go through the process, it updates your Windows Deployment Services boot image. So now let's see if this worked. So if I go to my one of my Windows virtual machines, and if I start loading our MDT, and then right here, if I press enter, so it's now loading, trying to contact my server, and it sees the Lite Touch and press enter, and it's loading that Lite Touch image that we have from our Windows server. Right here it says Lite Touch PE x64 WIM. And it should give you the Windows Deployment Toolkit window, just like that, the GUI. It'll take few minutes, a few seconds to load, depending on how good your device is and how fast your network is. And on this welcome image, this is the default welcome image for Windows MDT. I'm going to select Run the Deployment Wizard. And when you click on that, it will ask for your username and password in my situation, because I have added a username and password. So administrator. That's my domain. There you go. So on the very first step of your task sequences, very first step of your Windows Deployment Wizard is the task sequences, and you have the options of Windows 10 EDU x64, Windows 10 Pro x64, and Windows 11. So as you can see, remember that description I wrote, and it shows up right here. See, it says this will install Windows 10 Education Edition. This should be used for all clients except for IT group. This one says this option will install Windows 10 Professional on this client, and this should be used only for IT department computers. And this one says Windows 11 ENT, because reason for that is if I go back to my Windows server, and if I open my deployment workbench, and if I go to task sequences, and if I open this one, if I go to properties, under comments, it just have Windows 11 ENT. I just repeated the same thing up here, down here on my previous tutorial, right? But on this one, under properties, I have explained what it is. So it just basically, text or numbers or characters you can enter here, so that your IT analyst on the front line knows which one to select. So it has a description, so it's easy for them to select. So that description is what's showing up here. And what's showing up here, where it says Windows 10 EDU x64, that is, if I go to here, if I right click, if I go to properties, that's this name. That's this name that you have entered. So that's the name that shows up there. So whatever you modified here will show up on right here. But remember, every single time you change anything in the task sequence, or added an operating system and created a new task sequence, or you go to these properties and change any of these configuration options, you have to go here and right click on MDT deployment share and update your deployment share. Because if you don't do that, that change will not reflect on your Windows deployment wizard. So that's how you can add an additional operating systems to your existing Microsoft Windows deployment bootable file. And on the task sequence, it'll give your end user or IT analyst the options to select what they want to install. For example, let's say I want to install Windows 10 Pro, and click next, and go through the same process of installing Windows using the MDT and you can select these options and then go ahead and install it on your end device. So you can click begin and it start installing right after. So if you have any questions or concerns regarding any of the items we have covered today, please feel free to leave a comment below. Again, if you haven't watched my previous comprehensive tutorial on how to set up your MDT, I have leave the links in the description as well as a card on the top right hand corner. Until next time, thank you so much, and don't forget to subscribe and thumbs up this video, and have a nice day.